Yes, we are live now. Hello, a very good evening to the viewers of the Dialogue Today. Once again, we are back on the Dialogue Today's digital portal. As always, I, Romo Chandru, the editor in chief of the Dialogue Today, would like to take this opportunity and convey to our viewers that today we are standing at a very crucial juncture, not only in the present day of international politics, also in the history of international politics. As we know, the day, what importance and what significance it holds is 9/11. And many viewers have always asked us that why we are not conducting any series and discussion about Afghanistan and the recent change in Afghanistan, what developments occurred. So we were thinking that this day was coming and we will do something from this day. And we are also observing it very closely. So we know today is the 20th anniversary of 9/11 attack, and we have been joined with us a very eminent person, a distinguished fellow in this topic and uh, in this matter, rather to say, Professor Shubhajit Noshkar. I will definitely give him a formal introduction, but I would like to say that he is also my sir when I was in Jadavpur University Department of International Relations. So we have a very close bond with sir. Thank you, sir, for joining us today. So I first, as I have told you, that I will be giving the introduction of our distinguished speaker, who is Shubhajit Noshkar, is an assistant professor in the Department of International Relations at Jadavpur University, and his fields of specialization include South Asian politics, role of political Islam in Pakistan, domestic politics in Pakistan, with special reference to army, Indo-Pak relations, Kashmir, debates on secularism and communalism in India, politics of Muslim minority in India, and Dalit politics in contemporary India. He is a regular speaker on several news TV channels, and he speaks as an analyst on international affairs and domestic politics. And he is also a regular columnist at The Print, The Wire, The Quaint, and many more national publications and international publications, including our The Dialogue Today. In this special edition of virtual interview with our invited guest, we are going to discuss the pretext of the 20th anniversary of 9/11 attack, when a series of civilian aircraft slammed into the buildings of USA and the shockwaves sent by Qaeda under the patronage of the same Talibani regime in Afghanistan. Today's discussion is therefore themed on broad topic titled Two Decades of 9/11 and Resurgence of Jihadi Culture in Afghan region. Here, I would also like to share the story of the coinage of this term, the AFPAC region, which was popularized and possibly coined by Richard Holbrooke, the Obama administration's special representative of Afghanistan and Pakistan. Also, this the first Obama administration when coming into power, and the Obama's entourage of strategic thinkers and the security planners and policymakers, all in unison, stated that the northwest frontier province of Pakistan as the most dangerous part of on this planet, where threats against human lives are massive and the risks of such degrees emanate from human itself. So we can understand the importance of this region and the changing dynamics of Afghanistan and the ruling dispensation in Afghanistan. So we know that there was a claim from the of Talibani people that they will be having an oath-taking ceremony or the swearing-in ceremony today on 9/11 day anniversary, but that has been deferred in the day later in the day. So now, at the very beginning, I would again thank Professor Shubhajit Noshkar for taking his time out from his busy schedule and giving us this time. So, sir, uh, I would just first want you to introduce your initial thoughts on the recent developments, and then I will definitely go ahead with the questions that we have prepared. So, sir, over to you.
Well, uh, uh, well, thanks to you for basically organizing this. The dialogue today is organizing uh, in the last few months great discussions. Especially, I have seen Professor Pradeep Basu of Presidency is talking to Manoranjan Vapari, and then probably Dipsita also came, the former JNU Students Union president. So I mean, it's been It's going to be very interesting, especially when we, let's say, remember post 9/11, especially after almost 2 decades. Uh, I mean, the world has changed. I mean, since the 9/11 happened, and the way it happened. So, uh, and not because that 9/11 is to be remembered today the way, with sadness or with the painful memories, or maybe this might be the thoughts in the minds of millions of Americans. But then it has also changed the way global politics. It has also changed the way global politics looked like, let's say, some 2 decades ago or some decade ago. It also changed the global world order, and for good reasons or bad reasons, that of course we'll discuss about that. But then it and today 9/11, remembering 9/11 is very crucial, because the reason for which 9/11 basically happened, the perpetrators of 9/11 attack, they are kind of back. And the so-called war on terror, which basically was formulated in the aftermath of 9/11 by the then President George W. Bush. Today, his successor, President, his not immediate, but then his successor, in a way, successor President Joe Biden, he has once again uh, mm, uh, sort of considered the defeat uh, in the land where the whole 9/11 attack was, let's say, planned. And today, of course, I'm talking about Afghanistan, that how today, uh, the whole, because Afghanistan has been news from last almost a month. It's going to be a month. Afghanistan is in the international news, almost a prime time news today, for, of course, all the bad reasons, that a militant fundamentalist force in the name of Taliban have basically taken over Afghanistan. And of course, other associated groups, militant terror groups, or let's say Islamist groups, as Brookings senior fellow Sadi Hamid calls Islamist, because he differentiates Islamic and Islamist. So these Islamist groups basically have taken over Afghanistan, and of course they are backed by, as there is a whole lot of research and work is been done by world's most prominent authority, Professor Mr. Ahmed Rasid, a very veteran journalist, Pakistani journalist. He wrote a book way back in 2000 on Taliban, that how militant Islam, while and the whole syndrome is going to change that region. So, but nobody paid heed to that. And today, Ahmed Rasid, not Ahmed Rasid, the interior minister of Pakistan, but Ahmed Rasid, a legendary scholar on Taliban and Afpak region, along with people like Barnett Rubin, Kristen Fair, and others. So Ahmed Rasid today stands vindicated. The book where he predicted that Taliban's will come back, and the fight against the Taliban's are being lost. The kind of optics on which the America started, you know, its war against terror is basically is basically built around the so-called anti-terror narratives. But then, it was never basically for the democracy promotion or the confidence building measures among the masses of Afghanistan. But then it's basically done to sort of showcase, or to sort of gallery show the might of United States, the quote unquote the so-called superpower, that today, if there is any attack on us, we can go and sort of destroy that place. So this is the basically that mindset which led to the war on terror. It's not basically to fight the terror, whatever the terror, the in this case, uh, it's Islamist terror. So it's not fought along that line.
So, I will begin the questions. I will question you. The first question, like we have titled this show, a lot of controversy may occur also about what we mean about jihadi culture. So, my first question is that what does jihadi culture mean to the present and future scenario of Afpak region? If you could shed some light.
Well, jihadi culture. There is a whole article on Pakistan's jihadi culture written by again a very eminent journalist called Jessica Stern. So and Jessica again once again stands vindicated that this is the culture that basically. So this entire you know understanding of global jihad uh, basically has roots in the Arab. Those of you who have been studying or keeping an eye on Arab civilization, they would know that there are prominent Islamic figures like Ibn Taymiyyah, who is quote unquote being called as or being known in the world as the guru of political Islam. So this is the man who basically influenced a whole generation of Islamic leadership. Later on, influenced by Ibn Taymiyyah, somebody like Hassan al-Banna came up in Egypt. Hassan al-Banna, of course, is again a very prominent Islamic leader in the Arab countries, and this is the same man who established what do you call the Muslim Brotherhood. Okay, in Arabic word you call it Ikhwan. So it has kind of roots in the Arab countries. So Ibn Taymiyyah to me and to a lot of scholars, those are writing on Middle East and political Islam and Islamic jihad, they have agreed on the fact that this is the root, this is where it is being exported from this place. Okay. The whole swathe of Arab land. Now the jihadi culture is basically, whether you take Hassan al-Banna, Ibn Taymiyyah, and this whole Muslim Brotherhood phenomena, and then you know if you sort of come back to the Afpak region, Afghanistan Pakistan region, they are, the whole sort of Islamic understanding of society, or let's say politics, or maybe culture, is deeply influenced by let's say Hanabali or Hanafi Deobandi jurisprudence. And today Talibans are also influenced by the Sunni Hanafi Deobandi jurisprudence. And and this is very interesting that the Deobandi, the ideological base of the Deobandi Sunni Hanafi jurisprudence is in India, and the whole Deobandi madrasa's headquarters, the ideological headquarters, is in Saharanpur of Uttar Pradesh. So this is very interesting. Maybe there are people, those do not know the history of it. So and now from this particular place, and it has a historical legacy, from this place it became a very very influential school of Islamic thought. And there is many Deobandi madrasas. Those have mushroomed over the decades, and especially in the post 9/11, in the Pakistan, in in Bangladesh. In fact, in Bangladesh, there's a very prominent Deobandi madrasa is Art Hajari madrasa, probably Art Hajari or Art Hajari. This person called Allama Safi, who have recently died. This man, he came up with school of thought, let's say. He basically is a person, a Bangladeshi Islamist, who came up with he's a Sunni Islamic scholar. He basically studied in Darul Uloom Deoband, again Deobandi, madrasa. So he came up with this school of thought, this ideological grouping called Hefazat Islam. So and when you go to Pakistan, the entire Khyber Pakhtunkhwa region, the entire Fata region, federally administered tribal region, tribal areas, and even some places of Karachi. There are many Deobandi madrasas. And on the other hand, if you go to Kandahar is the basic base of Deobandi madrasas. And post 9/11, the madrasas have one of the reasons why the Afghan president, the last Afghan president, Ashraf Ghani, he could not modernize because the education system, because of the whole strict grip of these Deobandi madrasas in the education sector of Afghanistan from top to bottom, or let's say from bottom to top. So these madrasas, the Deobandi Hanafi jurisprudence influenced madrasas, basically, sort of wanted to, uh, you know, uh, the basic dream of this, school of thought is to establish an Islamic emirate in the world, let's say global Islamic emirate. So the global Islamic emirate, where there will be the ruler uh, will be an Amir, or let's say Khalifa, or you can call the Amirul Mominin. Today in Afghanistan, that kind of emirate structure is being established by the Taliban. So where their ideological chief, or their chief, Mullah Hibatullah Akhundzada, is being declared as Amirul Mominin. Amirul Mominin is basically the commander of the faithfuls in the Islamic line of thought. So, so these madrasas and school of thought, the Sunni Deobandi Hanafi school of thought, basically, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, even in India, their worldview is to capture the so-called democratic countries, and sort of replace that with the Islamic kingdom. And one of the for long, this entire jihadi culture was basically promoted in the Kashmir of both sides, the Kashmir of India and that side of Kashmir that is being occupied by Pakistan. So and this Kashmir, so of India's side. So this whole place is being targeted to create as a jihadi theater, or let's say to create a culture of jihad, where they will sort of fight to liberate this place, which is being captured by the let's say evils, let's say the non-Muslims. So they can be called as kafirs. But then this entire area was basically targeted, the entire the the borders that is being shared through Pakistan, through Kashmir. So this area is being targeted, and then later on, they just wanted to sort of uh, let's say sort of validate, or let's sort of validate the two nation theory of Jinnah through this kind of culture, that the jihad is basically uh, you know will act as an instrument where the whole non-Islamic lands, or the non-Islamic spaces, will be occupied by by the Islamic principles and the thoughts. Okay.
So you have raised so many important points, right? And it really prompts me to ask you many questions, but I will keep that for later, and I will stick to the plan. So now the next imminent question or imminent thought that we have, like when we talk about Islamist extremism and Islamist fundamentalism in popular thoughts or in layman's mind, we often think that what Islamist extremism does, it first restricts the women liberation or women's freedom, So now I want to know how this jihadi culture would be impacted by the Talibani fundamentalist over women section, and especially the special ethnicities. There are a lot of ethnic composition in Afghanistan. There are Hazara women's, Panjshir women's, Tajik women's, and what would be their future? Like, we know it will be a very green future, and how we can see, like, there have been migration. There are people who are trying to flee Afghanistan, but still there are a lot of people stuck in Afghanistan, and we are also seeing the resistance that is still raging on from the Panjshir Valley. We don't know what is the exact thing right going on right now, but still there are a lot of claims that the Panjshir resistance movements are saying that yes, they are still holding on. The situation is bad, and they are not getting support. And also the Taliban is claiming that they have already taken over. But there are other ethnicities as well. Like they are at odds with the Taliban's so-called school of thought.
Well, uh, uh, you know, the Islamic world has changed in the last 20 years, or let's say last 2 decades, since uh, the 9/11 incident. And there is a kind of, you know, sort of confrontations, the internal confrontations that actually goes on, mm, in this whole fight for, true Islam, quote unquote true Islam. So there are countries even in the Arab, where they basically do not subscribe to the way Islamic worldview is being. For example, Tunisia, they were part of Arab Spring. I mean, they saw sort of the leap through Arab Spring, but then later Tunisia basically came up with a moderate kind of Islamic school. So they have rejected let's say the ideology of Muslim Brotherhood, or Sunni Hanafi jurisprudence, or that kind of school of thought. But then Apak region hasn't changed much, and that hasn't changed precisely because two reasons. One is that the Pakistan, because there is a partition narrative at the back of it, and second is that Pakistan become a security state since Pakistan thinks, and because there is a India Pakistan enmity that actually is always, there is a back and forth kind of confrontation that goes on between these two countries, two very important countries in South Asia. So as far as Pakistan is concerned, Pakistan is largely, even though there is election happened in the last few years back, but then Pakistan is largely controlled by Pakistani army, and for all the important reasons, as they would say, because the and Pakistan has been on the brink because of this, and Pakistan could not basically become a liberal democratic state. Though India's liberal democratic credentials today are very low, but Pakistan also could never become a liberal democracy because of, or let's say democracy, because of the army is being overpowered. Army basically is works as a parallel state, as there is a funny saying that in other countries the state has an army, but in the case of Pakistan, the army has a state. So Pakistan is basically into this whole dilemma. But that dilemma decade is over, and Pakistan generals, especially the Pakistan chief, army chief, and of course Pakistan army chief's very subservient general who becomes ISI chief, they basically call the shots in the foreign policy making, and in fact internal security issues. Okay, so so Pakistan basically and United States played a very dubious role right from the 60s in the South Asian region. So they basically tried to initially balance India and China through basically India through Pakistan. So they started arming Pakistan in the 60s, Pakistani army and things like that. And Ahmed Rashid basically has written a detailed account of that. He Ahmed Rashid wrote this famous book called Pakistan on the Brink. Okay, so and he basically in that book, he uh, mm, uh, uh, and the Pakistan on the Brink, the future of Pakistan and Afghanistan. So he basically writes that there were times where people hoped that in the immediate future Pakistan will be sort of you know will do better, will pave a path towards democracy. But then Pakistan did not, and he says in his book Pakistan on the Brink, the future of Pakistan, Afghanistan and the West, he says that the internal power struggles within the political circles, and of course the relationship between the United States and Pakistan basically overpowered the Pakistani army. So this whole you know Pakistani state and the army, they basically, Pakistani state is the army, basically. So they started basically uh, sort of extending their footprint in the whole of South Asian region through an optics war, through the intelligence war, let's say. Not optics war, but intelligence war. So they started influencing a lot of Afghan youths, in their madrasas, in especially in the FATA region. If you look at the Afghan, the whole history of Afghan, when there was Soviet Russia, the erstwhile USSR came and sort of they installed their man Najibullah, who was largely secular and kind of atheist person, and later on the guy was hacked to death by the Taliban, by basically the Islamist fundamentalists. So, but then post that, there was this whole Mujahideen gang, those who are basically trained in the by the Pakistani army. And this is everywhere. The Ahmed Rashid has been writing extensively on that. Scholars like Barnett Rubin, they are writing on this, that how Pakistani army and Pakistan ISI had been training the were, let's say, preparing the Mujahideen groups. But then when Mujahideens basically took over after the death of Najibullah, so there was a huge chaos, and then there was issues of corruption and stuff like that, as it is being reported. But then uh, mm, from post that, this is in the 1990s, there was a man called Mullah Umar, who is basically the founder of Taliban. So this man was basically those days, he was in Pakistan, Pakistan's federally administered tribal region. So, and this guy was basically promoted, and he was basically trained, and his students, because Taliban's means talibs, it comes from the word talibs means basically the students. So these students, those are basically Talibans, they were trained in various madrasas, the Devandi madrasas of Pakistan, especially in Darul Uloom Haqqaniya, which trains this Islamist, which trains the young youths in the Islamist principles, and creates a jihadi fantasy. Okay. Among the students, and later these students across the Pakistani madrasas, Devandi madrasas, they sort of joined Mullah Umar, and they started fighting the Mujahideen groups. And then of course in 1996 they took over Afghanistan, and of course 5 years later in 2001 9/11 happens, and then again Afghanistan in the United States comes to Afghanistan, and they occupy. But then, well, as far as the women are concerned, of course, in the whole of Pak region, let's say the entire world is of course a sit hole for the women, but especially in the religious setups where the religion thinkings, and especially in Deobandi thinking, where they think that Sharia law should be implemented. Uh, mm, Sharia basically do not give any power to the women. They basically think that women are the custodians of the men, uh, and uh, mm, and they think that women as basically very objects. Very recently, Talibani ministers and spokespersons are saying that women are for giving birth to the child. Women are not. Women should not be thought. That kind of fascist mentality is there. But the point is that in even if you look at the whole Afghanistan, or let's say Pakistani setup, which is basically the home ground for these Afghani jihadists, Talibanis or Al Qaeda's, and various Laskar groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jamaat-ud Dawa, and Laskari Jang Bhi, Harkatul Mujahideen, and others. So they are basically, their entire worldview is basically to enslave women and to sort of otherize women and uh, to marginalize women, because they do not think that women are capable of free thinking. There are many, so this kind of thinking, and the big worst sufferers in these are the ethnic minorities, the minority women, like Hajara women. Those are in the case of Pakistan, in the Baluchi women, and Hajara women in Afghanistan today. Hajara Tajik women, they are the worst victims of this Sharia worldview, or let's say Deobandi thinking, Deobandi Hanafi thinking, which basically promotes which says basically for adultery the women are responsible, men are not, so women can be lashed out through canes and other things. So this whole women's freedom, or let's say the security of women, the women life, the women's dreams are basically denied mm, uh, by Islamist Deobandi Hanafi, worldview, or let's say school of thought. And this is what even these madrasas, these are all the madrasas where all these male Muslim male, they are being trained and they are being taught, where the women basically have no place in their whole. Even today, that if you look at the Talibani government, Taliban 2.0 government, there is no woman, and they think, and one of their spokesperson Jabiullah Mujahid, he has gone on record saying that we do not think women are capable of governance. But these are the same women those had 27% representation in the last Afghan parliament. So this whole Islamist fundamentalist worldview, or the radical Islamist worldview, basically denies the freedom to the women, and especially the ethnic minority women, like Hajara Tajik women. They are the worst sufferers and victims. In fact, the Hindu women in Pakistan, Afghanistan region, the Sikh women, they are also being sort of let's say forced converted, and things like that happen almost on regular basis. Okay.
Sir, from your commentary, we got to know a lot of things, but what we can understand that major part of your commentary revolved around the AFPAC region and the Pakistan's involvement in promoting this jihadi terrorism or the Islamist fundamentalism. So we are all aware about those who are students of international relations. We are all aware about Pakistan's double standards and Pakistan's dubious nature. And we all knew that Nasrullah Babar, General Nasrullah Babar, who was the father of the Taliban, as well as the former ISI chief, Hamid Gul. Even we see a lot of interviews still on the YouTube that how he is patronizing Osama bin Laden, and he was favoring Osama bin Laden. He's saying that they are no wrong. And also in the recent takeover, we have seen that how the Prime Minister of Pakistan, who was once a liberal poster boy in Pakistan, Imran Khan, even stated that Taliban was not at fault and Talibans are not terrorists, and rather he regarded this war on terrorism, like he dismissed the war on terrorism theory, and he said that it was all that the Western world thought of liberating women, and that's how disparaging remarks that he makes often. So now I would like to talk about the double standards of the Western powers and the Western world as well. So what do you think about the double standards of American president in aiding the Islamist fundamentalists in AfPak region? And now, can the global society identify the power sections of those state and non-state actors who purportedly present Talibans in a new branding of good Talibans? Also, I would like to add, what stakes or underhand roles do they have in the restoration of this jihadi culture at large in the AfPak region?
Well, too many things there in the question. One, of course, first, let me sort of bring the first thing first, the role of Pakistan General Nasrullah Babar and former ISI chiefs. Well, for many of IR students, uh, the whole Afpak region, is being taught in a very simplistic manner without basically telling them the nuances of an Islamic society, a society which keeps on sort of bringing the revivalism as a factor. So if you do not understand the Islamism or the revivalist Islam, the power of revivalist Islam, or the historical legacy of revivalist Islam, it's very difficult that why Afghanistan Pakistan region is such a complex region, that such a big superpower even could not win a war in Afghanistan. Okay, and none of these people, if you take the last 1,000 years of history of even Mughals wanted to capture Afghanistan, Mughals could not win. Okay, so this is the history of Afghanistan. So Afghanistan, because the Afpak region needs to be understood through the lens of revivalist Islam now, or let's say political Islam. And now let me sort of let me sort of address the story of ISI chief Nasrullah Babar and Hamid Gul, and General Asad Durrani and others. So Talibans are, if you read Ahmed Rasid's book on Taliban, if you read Ahmed Rasid's another important legendary book, Descent into Chaos, which is Afghanistan, and of course, if you read, also, I mean, if you watch many of this Pakistani former ISI chiefs interviews in their own news channels of Pakistan, they have gone on record. They have gone on record that they have trained uh, hmm, uh, 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 Afghan Mujahideens. They have trained terror groups, and they have sort of cultivated them to uh, to 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 use them as their proxy, in Kashmir or in other places. Ahmed Rasid had given a interview some 9 to 10 years back. The legendary journalist Ahmed Rasid, who is probably world's undisputed expert on Taliban and Afghanistan Pakistan region and militant Islam. So he basically kept on going on record saying that Talibani military, Pakistan's former army chiefs, or the Pakistani army chiefs and ISI chiefs, they basically, kept on training, arming, and of course, ideologically, you know, made them sort of into the Islamic worldview. Now, very recently, the former ISI chiefs, those are basically at a very old age, they are giving interviews. Those basically were, you know, sort of training the Taliban's those days, and Al Qaeda and others. Once a general is General Javed Ashraf Kaji, who who held a very prominent position when, during 90s, when Talibans would be taking over as in Afghanistan. General Javed Ashraf Kaji very recently gave an interview to two very prominent news channels of Pakistan. One is ARY News. Those of you watch, are basically Pakistan watchers, or Pakistan want to expertise on Pakistan or APAC region, they would know. And another one is Bol News. So, and it has gone viral. Both the interviews have gone viral. So General Javed Ashraf Kaji was basically the head of ISI in 1993 to 1995. And remember, in 1996, Taliban's are taking over. So this man, General Kaji, was the ISI chief from 1993 to 1995, a very important period. Another important period, when he was the chief of military intelligence, which is MI, the infamous, let's say, military intelligence, MI. Those basically basically army's intelligence department. So he was the MI chief from 1990 to 1991. So this man called General Ashraf Kaji, Javed Ashraf Kaji, in this interview to ARY, he said that, and this is on YouTube. This interview is called as Off the Record by Kasif Abbasi, a very prominent Pakistani journalist. So he told Kasif Abbasi that how he, being a ISI chief those days, when Taliban's in the later years will be taking over Afghanistan, then how he trained and how he met the Taliban, commanders, and how he financially helped, how Pakistan ISI financially helped them, trained them in Pakistan, and how basically when even in the post 2001, when United States entered with the war on terror narrative, how these Talibans, they were scattered and came back to their old sanctuary of Pakistan, this in the North Waziristan and South Waziristan and other the FATA areas, federally administered tribal areas. This is all their own words. General Nasrullah Babar was the then interior minister of Benazir Bhutto. Benazir Bhutto was those days the prime minister of Pakistan. So General Babar, basically being a general, he basically gave a free hand to the ISI and army chiefs. And General Nasrullah Babar was, was very instrumental in, telling the ISI and army to play a very pivotal role in, in arming Taliban, because those days the Afghan Mujahideen groups, the groups like Burhanuddin Rabbani and Ahmed Shah Massoud, the Northern Alliance group. So how there was how Pakistan ISI and army, they got disillusioned by the Northern Alliance, Massoud and Rabbani's, Burhanuddin Rabbani's and others. So and they started cultivating Mullah Omar and Taliban, and later on in 1996, of course, that they have taken over Afghanistan from 1996 to 2001. Taliban had 1.0 government, first government. Now, the role of America here. The role of America has been very dubious. I mean, as I have been telling in various news channels, the Americans basically told the international community that they are fighting war on terror, but on the other hand, they were funding ISI and Pakistani army. And they know this is out in the open, that Pakistani army, Amrullah Saleh, the last vice president of the Afghan government, Ashraf Ghani's government, he used to be the chief of the intelligence agency of Afghanistan, NDS. So he basically, he was the NDS chief during Hamid Karzai's presidency, the former president Hamid Karzai. who was basically installed by the Bush administration, when Taliban government was toppled. So the United States basically, on the other hand, armed Pakistani army and Pakistani ISI, but on the other, they were telling the world that they are fighting war on terror. So this dubiousness has been there, and they try to create, to suit their own narrative, to create narratives like good Taliban, bad Taliban, kind of distinction, which is very very oxymoronic. And one of these American Brookings Institution, I forgot the name, fellow, he said that only good Taliban is a dead Taliban, which is in a way true, because they do not believe in any do not believe in justice, equality, and things like that. So West has always been and this whole flawed war on terror, when and those days they told that they will rebuild Afghanistan, they will establish democracy in Afghanistan. This is what Bush, the Biden used to be the Obama's vice president, and played a very very crucial role. People used to say that Obama's Biden used to be more powerful than Obama in the in White House. But so Biden and Bush, Trump, Obama, so these all guys basically, they told the world that they are invading Afghanistan for a rebuilding, for rebuilding that society. But when they installed Karzai, Hamid Karzai as the president, so Karzai used to visit White House and used to plead before the American presidents like George W. Bush, especially, that you are not basically fighting Talibans, you are fighting Al Qaeda. So Al Qaeda and Talibans, they share the same kind of worldview, and these Talibans will, in years, in the coming years, will grow in such a manner that they will, they can capture the power, and again it will be a fundamentalist state structure, and it will become a sanctuary for terrorists. So those days, you would know that America got bogged down in Iraq, so they invaded Iraq. And that's a manipulated war in Iraq. They said that Saddam Hussein had the weapon of mass destruction, and they invaded into Iraq. So they got bogged down in Iraq. They got busy with Iraq, and they sort of did not pay much attention to fight, to give the same zeal in fighting the terrorists in Afghan, the Islamist militant groups in Afghanistan. Okay. So this is how it basically happened, and this is the kind of dubiousness of uh, the American presidents, that they never, they sort of started fighting one after another war, and that basically created a huge without winning a war, they just went on to invade another war. So and that actually created havoc on those societies, because uh, those societies were bombarded, there were airstrikes, there were devastating visuals. The newborn childs, they were, sort of murdered, killed, massacred by these airstrikes and things like that, by these NATO forces and International Security Assistance Forces, the NATO ISAF forces. So, so America did all of that, but they never wanted to eliminate Islamist fundamentalism, because they cannot do that when they are basically aiding Pakistani army, which is basically, which is very true, as Ahmed Rashid says, that it's a rogue institution. Even people like Farid Zakaria, who wrote a fantastic book called Post-American World. So Farid Zakaria, in various commentaries and various interviews, he says that that the irony of this whole war on terror fight has been that it it never fought against the terror. It basically fought against the common Muslims or the innocent Muslims. So the Islamist terrorists were basically never eliminated. They never wanted to, probably. Today, Joe Biden says that, we never wanted to build Afghanistan, and shedding crocodile tears. When he says that uh, uh, this is the Afghanis, they basically betrayed us. So this is the American double standard. And what this war on terror in turn created is that they have, created a sense of fear, sense of shame, sense of surveillance in the minds of Muslims. And there was a whole anti-Muslim bigotry also is being created through this flawed war on terror strategy.
It was a nice analysis that you have given to us, and definitely there are new nuances we have known through your analysis. So we also would like to know, like you have covered a lot about the NATO-led war on terror campaign and how it fell apart. But I would like to know, like we all knew that this NATO-led war on terrorism also had a aspiration for promoting liberal democracy. So now we hear Joe Biden and also the dispensation, the US dispensation, the current dispensation, that's saying that it was not our priority to build or do nation building in Afghanistan. And this rhetoric has been started with Trump, and then it was like amplified by Biden. So now I want to know, then what is the future of liberal democracy now? And will 9/11 come back again? Like I would like to refer to John Bolton, the former NSA in Trump's administration. He recently in a CNN interview said that he thinks that Taliban's gonna hunt back the Americans in near future, and it's gonna haunt them the decisions taken by Biden. And he also remarked that this problem that what the world is witnessing right now is not only to be blamed on the Biden administration, it should be also squarely blamed to the Trump administration. And he pointed out a very important thing, that this Trump administration was the first one to delegitimize the Afghan government, the government in the peace process. And once you delegitimize a current government, whatever it was, like it was still democratic than the Taliban's. So they delegitimize this Taliban government, this Ghani government, and totally dealt with the unilateral peace talk with the Taliban's in Doha.
Yeah, I mean, Trump today is accusing Biden is basically very, very ironical. This guy called Trump. I mean, again, a far right fascist. So this guy is the one who basically handed over. Biden had nothing, not much to do. Of course, Biden could do many things that he didn't do, and Biden is not alone in this sin. There are many stakeholders in this, but Trump is the guy who basically handed over Afghanistan to the Taliban's. You'd know that today there are Talibans. There is a huge difference between Taliban 1.0 and Taliban 2.0. Difference in terms of, not in terms of their worldview, but in terms of how they operate, and how sophisticatedly they are perpetrating fundamentalism, or maybe promoting Islamist fantasies. So this guy Trump basically, uh, you know his advisor, special advisor, Appag advisor Jalme Khalilzad, so he appointed him to sort of negotiate a deal with the Taliban's in Taliban's political office in Qatar, Doha. So, they sort of signed a quote unquote peace deal with the Taliban's, which is famously or infamously known as Khalilzad Baradar deal. because it was signed basically from the American side, the Afghanistan-Pakistan Special Representative Zalmay Khalilzad, and from Taliban side, the Taliban's chief negotiator Abdul Ghani Baradar, the present Deputy Prime Minister, who is being appointed as a Deputy Prime Minister of Afghanistan Taliban government. Okay, so so this was this guy, and this deal was basically felicitated by uh, the Pakistani army and Pakistani ISI. You would see this guy called Zalmay Khalilzad, who was the United States Special Ambassador for the APAC. This guy met so many times with the Pakistan Army Chief General Bajwa, Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan, Pakistan ISI former ISI Chief Naveed Mukhtar, and then the present ISI Chief General Fayez Hamid, and others. So they cut a deal. This was basically Trump who cut this deal, this so-called deal, and this basically deal is basically this deal basically normalized or sort of validated the Islamist uh, terror or the Islamist terrorist outfit, and sort of turned them into a into a formal structural model, which can run, of course, a government, in fact. So this is all being done by this dubious American presidents, not Trump, Obama himself. But then Obama's advisor, APAC advisor Richard Holbrooke, was a very different man. He basically wanted he was basically in favor of talking to the other stakeholders of the the common stakeholders of what do you say of Afghanistan. He said that there is no military solution to the war on terror. And in fact, Richard Holbrooke appointed a very prominent man as his political advisor on Afghanistan, Pakistan. His name is Wali Nasser. Wali Nasser, of course, is an Iranian academic who basically is a global prominent expert on Middle East and Islamic world. So Wali Wali wrote a lot of book on the Shia revival, on Maududi, another Islamist man. But Wali wrote a book called The Dispensable Nation and the American Foreign Policy in Retreat. So Wali Nasser is basically is a professor in probably is a professor in John Hopkins University, University School of Advanced International Studies in Washington D.C. So Wali wrote this book called The Dispensable Nation, that how American foreign policy was in retreat. So, and this book, very interestingly, is being dedicated to Richard Holbrooke. So Richard Holbrooke had a mysterious death in New York, who basically advocated talks, not the talks that Zalmay Khalilzad Trump would want, but a talk with the common Afghans, and did not want a military solution. So he basically saw that military solution to the Afghan problem is not a solution, and it will basically radicalize. And the way war on terror basically has happened, and the way war on terror is being operated in APAC region, it basically created multiple number of terror groups, Islamist fundamentalist groups, precisely because the handlers of these airstrikes, the rapid airstrikes that used to happen in the post 2001, post 9/11. So the handlers used to be from the United States, from Pentagon and other places. So they never knew whether these are common Afghanis or these are terrorists. So in the turn, there were disturbing visuals where the young childs, young girls, young boys are being killed through the drone strikes and through the airstrikes. So the irony of the liberal democracy is this, including America, that they basically want to impose a kind of worldview without knowing the society, without knowing the indigenous societal structure, and moreover the dual standard over here, where they basically, they arm an evil power called Pakistan Army and ISI chief, which Ahmed Rashid says is very, very, which basically, later on worked against America, and nobody knows whether there would be another 9/11 or not, because Taliban's today again, with the coming up of Taliban, the ISIS groups, the offshoots of ISIS like ISKP, the the Khorasan province, Islamic State Khorasan province, and other ISIS modules, Laskar modules, even Al Qaeda modules, they have got activated. Okay, and because they got new sanctuaries in uh, in Afghanistan, many of us do not, many of you do not know that when Mullah Umar was in government, Taliban 1.0, he was in the Amirul Mominin. So this man was basically, he was requested by the American CIA and others that please hand over Laden to us. And Mullah Umar basically rejected that proposal. Mullah Umar said that I cannot hand over Al Qaeda chief without having a substantial proof in my hand, because he's my state guest. Those days, Al Qaeda used to stay in the Hindu Kush mountain region. Okay, or sometimes he used to go back and forth between Kandahar and Hindu Kush. So, this is the irony of the liberal democracy. Like the United States, those think that their model of democracy is superior, which is basically imperial, and it is basically basically operated through the military industrial complexes. So they never wanted to create an egalitarian society. They never wanted to value. I remember Dr. Ambedkar, in fact, who used to say that, without a social democracy, you cannot have political democracy. In Afghanistan, there is no social democracy. I mean, there was never democracy, but then there is a huge social gap. In Pakistan, in fact, in Afghanistan, it is the warlords in various provinces. Those run the common Afghans are very, very, very much victims. Even I appreciate the $1 billion development projects that has been carried out in Afghanistan by the Indian government over the decades, is basically is much better than this war and terror of uh, uh, war and terror formula of the United States. Okay, so the liberal democracy as an idea hasn't fallen flat, but the liberal democratic states, their double standards and their integrity has come under the question, surely, because they have failed Iraq, they have failed Syria, they have destroyed almost Afghanistan and handed over Afghanistan to a terrorist module called Taliban, the Islamist fundamentalists.
Sir, you have just mentioned that the liberal democracies have failed in Iraq and Syria. So now Taliban taking over Afghanistan and making it a sanctuary for the terror modules in future. So it reminded us the not so long back, but in recent past, the history of 2014, the Syrian uprising of ISI or Daesh, and we already talked about ISIK. So now I just want to know how different or similar do you see the rise of Taliban in Kabul and the rise of ISIS in Mosul? And also, I would also like to add a question that you have talked about the Fatah region and the Quetta region also. The Quetta is a very important place geostrategically for Taliban in Pakistan. When they were facing a lot of resistance in Afghanistan, whether it from the NATO forces or the local Afghan forces, they fled to Quetta region and they used Quetta region. They also have their organization established, this name as Tahriki Taliban Pakistan. So do you see any similarity of ISIS or Daesh in Syria, like how they use Mosul and Al Raqqa, to one as operated as an administrative capital, one as a ideological capital? will Taliban use this? Kandahar was always a very strong zone, because Kandahar never in this 20 years war period that Kandahar was fully taken over by the American forces. The countryside always Taliban dominated. Mostly the cities were in control of the Afghan administration. So how do you see this thing? Any
Well,
similarity with ISIS?
so we are running 1 hour 5 minutes. So how more minutes we have? 5-10 minutes more.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, so this maybe we can conclude here. So, so there are a lot of questions in the last question. Uh, well, uh, whatever happened in during the Arab Spring is, of course, today if you look at the post-Arab Spring Arab, these countries like Egypt, Tunisia, and other places. So the Libya, uh, you know I don't know what has happened to the Arab Spring. There are articles written what has happened to the Arab Spring. So because Arab Spring, you know, uh, I mean, there was a mass uprising, but then it was basically manipulated by the CIA later, which is the sad part, and that is why today when you sort of, let's say, assess what has happened uh, uh, in the Arab region or through the Arab Spring, it basically, as I said, that Arab basically has been an ideological Islamist ground, and they provided that grounding for. But that basically goalpost has shifted to Afpak region in the let's say in the post 9/11 world, which basically destroyed the American supremacy, in the post 9/11, because they went into America and they sort of attacked the America's prominent places, the Twin Towers. So now, when you say that this Quetta and other places, and differentiating ISIS, ISKP, Taliban, Al Qaeda, and others, they are not basically different. I mean, differentiating Islamist groups or the fascist groups is very, very oxymoronic, because all of these groups, they share the same worldview of creating an Islamic emirate worldwide, so or Islamic kingdom. So differentiating Muslim Brotherhood with Taliban, differentiating ISKP with the Lashkar-e-Taiba, it would be very, very oxymoronic. Okay, it's very, very contradictory, because they all kind of, these are very, very radical Sunni Islamist groups. Okay. There are kind of infighting that basically happens at times. It basically within the Islamic militant movement, it basically, you know uh, mm, if you just sort of try to read into that, you will be left with a lot of betrayal. Okay. Because the 20 years after this 9/11, we are still not clear on how to think about radical Islam. Okay. And this is what Farid Zakaria wrote in Washington Post yesterday, that 20 years after 9/11, we are still not clear on how to think about radical Islam. So whether it is real, whether it is evil, but over the past 2 decades, what Farid says, that Farid, of course, the very prominent journalist in the CNN, and of course a good scholar also. So Farid says that this whole Islamist, radical Islamist, groups, they have lost the ideological argument. So the real clash of civilization was never between the West and Islam. So it was basically within the world of Islam. Okay. So Islamic countries. So and between the existing regimes and their Islamist opposition movements, and more broadly between kind of the Muslims, those are, let's say, religious, but they never believed in Islamist militancy. So it's so the post 9/11, 20 years after the post 9/11, is left us with doubts to think about radical Islam. Well, so that goes that way. And now Quetta and other places, of course, it has a historical. Quetta is a very very important city in Balochistan. Quetta is an ideological Deobandi ground for Talibani and other terrorist groups, the other Islamist groups, militant groups. In Quetta, they established a surah called Quetta Surah, infamous Quetta Surah, and from there they used to run the whole, Talibani system, whether it's the Afghan Taliban system. So Pakistan Taliban, TTP, Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, has been created much later, because those days they thought that uh, this moderate voices in Pakistan, they are basically destroying the Islamic rubric in Islamic, or let's say Sharia rubric of the Islamic worldview. So that's when they established Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan as an offshoot of Afghan Taliban, and wanted to capture Pakistan. But then Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan was never engaged with ISI and Pakistan Army the way it was engaged with Afghan Taliban. So they sort of, but they are active now. But Quetta had this surah from which they used to run their ideological supreme judicial councils, because Taliban's and the Islamist groups, they do not run in any democratic structure. They believe in the today's Taliban government is run on council, which is broadly called as Rehbari Surah. So Rehbari Surah is basically council of these Islamist men. They would be passing the judgments. So they are basically the supreme judges. Okay, and of course at the top is Amirul Mominin Hibatullah, Mullah Hibatullah Akhundzada, not the Hassan Akhund, who is the prime minister, but the Amirul Mominin, the chief of Taliban, whose associate is being appointed as the prime minister of Taliban 2.0 in Afghanistan. Now, Quetta, of course, has a very, very important role to play, in this whole ideological, to run this whole system when Taliban was basically toppled in 2001. And of course, Kandahar, as you said, the Kandahar is, of course, their own ground. Kandahar is the place where all of these Talibani commanders and these Islamist, leaders, they basically grew up in Kandahar, and they walked into Pakistan's Darul Uloom Haqqaniya Madrasa, which is called as University of Terror by Western scholars, University of Jihad. So they most of them are being trained in Darul Uloom Haqqaniya, again a Deobandi Madrasa, Sunni Deobandi Hanafi Islamic jurisprudence. They believe in that kind of worldview. So and from there they basically used to train with the fantasies of global jihad. So this basically, the post 9/11 has, has basically ended in a bloody chaotic revivalist Islam in Afghan region. And so whether it's Kandahar, whether it's Quetta, whether it's Waziristan, South Waziristan or North Waziristan, whether it's Fatah, whether it's KPK, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, or in fact, it can anytime destabilize Pakistan. If Pakistan today is thinking that, they think that they will have good time, they will have strategic depth to once again revived in Afghanistan through Taliban government, they are wrong, because that can basically have a spillover into Pakistan, and it can create a lot of trouble in Pakistan. So Pakistan's own existence will be in question if Pakistan thinks that they do not need to fight militants and Islamists. So it will be very problematic. They are thinking that Kashmir will be taken over just because Taliban have come. So it's basically a kind of very very miscalculation. So it will affect as much. It will affect India as that much. It can affect Pakistan, because Pakistan, in the last few years back, they saw a kind of election which is a very very first election, but still there are many Pakistanis, those have those are trained in the American and the European Western universities and went back to Pakistan, and they do not subscribe to this worldview. Uh, you know, um, so the famous lawyers movement, civil society, they are becoming kind of taking roots and taking anti-army, anti-militant, anti-Islamism kind of stances. For example, whether it's in Lums, and today they have they have the guards. Even Pakistani women, a lot of Pakistani women, they are resisting. They have come up with the Aurat March, which is gaining traction in Pakistan, and which is also the case in Afghanistan. A lot of Afghan women are protesting against the bloody eyes of Taliban. Whether it's Crystal Bayat, whether it's Sajjad Akbar, Aisa Khurram, and the other young generation of girls, Ariana Said. So they are basically speaking to the world and making the international community aware that, hey, look, we are not going to go by the Talibani fatwas or Islamist worldview. We want free and fair space for us too, like this militant Islamist men.
Thank you, sir. Though we have a lot of questions, but maybe for next session we can store it. And if you just like, I would just ask you, like, if you just allow for 2 minutes, like a question, like we are already seeing an endorsement by China, and AFPAC region is also crucial for China. So this question we also have talked about, like, we are seeing, is there a new AFPAC China coalition? If you just make a quick remark on this thing, and as we know that the CPEC is a very important project for China, and it runs down to Balochistan. Just a quick
Oh,
remark,
yes.
sir.
Mm-hmm. Mm, uh, this will just hello. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It okay. 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 So again, this is a very important question. I was expecting this. That you know, China, China is trying to sort of uh, is trying to play a new game in uh, in this whole let's say uh, Talibani takeover. They, along with Pakistan, they are thinking that it will have a they will play a great game here against the United States and you know uh, mm, and of course against the what do you say, the you know India. Okay. So, but China should not forget that these entire Talibani groups also, they can give tough time through the insurgency groups in anti-China insurgency groups in Xinjiang. Okay, so those the Uyghur militants, let's say, the you know, so those basically they enter into Afghanistan through the checkpoints of Kasgar, okay, which is basically southwest of China's Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. So and China can anytime be disturbed through that insurgency movement. So and China should not forget that this can come back on them heavily, because there's a I'm forgetting the insurgency group, the name of that insurgency group,
East
that
Turkish, East Turkmenistan,
East,
East
East
Turkmenistan.
Turkestan, yeah, East Turkestan Islamic militant group. So they can, because China and that through the Kasgar province of China, so they have a direct borders here with Afghanistan. So this can, but if China is dreaming that because of the OBOR and CPEC, China Pakistan Economic Corridor, because Afghanistan, as I say, is a is a crossroad. Very famously it is known, as Ahmed Rashid says, again the legendary journalist, the more we take this his name, the less it is, because this man uh, basically way back in 2000, he predicted that Taliban's are coming in Afghanistan, and then Taliban's came in 2001. Ahmed Rashid says, and of course, it is geographical map is there, and China, Afghanistan is at the crossroad of Central Asia, Pakistan, and the Southwest Asia. Okay, not Southeast, but Southwest Asia, which is so Afghanistan is a place which is crucial geostrategic location, and it can be a theater in the coming days. It can be a theater for all the good reason or bad reasons we do not know. Time will tell that. As a theater of, let's say, new geopolitical game, okay, and or let's say new geopolitical chessboard. So it's very again, let's say, problematic. It can turn out problematic for China, or maybe China is trying to negotiate a deal with the Talibans to sort of stop this Turkestan militants, the East Turkestan militants. Those are creating problems through the Kashgar province into the Xinjiang autonomous region. Uh, hmm, so the China, the what do you say, yeah, so the China Pakistan Taliban axis, or this coalition, it no one basically knows that how it can basically turn out to be, because Russia is already not saying yes to the Taliban government. America is waiting and watching. India is waiting and watching, though India special ambassador Deepak Mittal met with a moderate, quote unquote, moderate, the one of the senior Taliban guy called Stanigzai, who is now the deputy minister in the Taliban government. But this is going to be a very important, kind of situations that's going to unfold. On the other hand, because there are a lot of moderate Afghans, indigenous Afghans like Hajaras, Tajik, and the Pansirians, the Amrullah Saleh and Ahmed Masood group. So they are not going to give a very easy space to the Taliban 2.0.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the enlightening points. And it was scheduled for 1 hour, but it almost passed 22 minutes. So it was an engaging discussion, though. I hope our viewers have also liked it. And we hope, like, lastly, we have spoke about China and China's aspirational or for this role that we can see in the future. We can discuss this with you in great details because it requires another session. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.